Stay with me, baby. Grace, get the crash cart now! Calling it in. I need you steady, Whitney, right now.
We caught her on the stairwell. She's not hospital staff. Where is my son? Take me to him right now.
The monitor screamed before Whitney's mind caught up with her hands. 3 a.m., Empire City General, and baby Eli's oxygen numbers were dropping faster than any post-viral dip she had charted in 9 years of nursing. She did not think. She moved cart, mask, call button because when it is your own son on that table, instinct always outruns fear. "Talk to me, baby," she whispered, voice steady for his sake, breaking for no one else to hear. "Stay with mommy. Stay right here with me." Behind her, Grace Whitfield was already calling it in, voice clipped and clean the way 30 years on this floor teaches a person to sound when they are terrified. Around them, machines beeped in a rhythm Whitney had memorized on other people's babies 1,000 times and had never once let herself imagine hearing on her own son. Nobody in that room knew yet that this was not a virus. Somebody had done this to him on purpose, inside a hospital where Whitney had spent 9 years keeping other people's children safe. And in a few hours, the man who once promised to protect them both, and then chose his family's name over her heart in front of 600 strangers, was about to learn exactly what his silence had cost. If you're already feeling Whitney's fear in that hospital room, wait until you learn exactly how she got there. Subscribe, hit like, and comment where in the world you're watching from tonight, because the truth behind this family starts 2 years earlier, and it changes everything. 2 years earlier, Whitney Marshall did not believe a man like Daniel Kang could love someone like her and mean it. She learned different on a Tuesday night, in a hospital corridor, the night his baby sister was wheeled into her ward burning with a fever nobody could explain fast enough. He did not look at Whitney like a nurse doing her job. He looked at her like she was the only steady thing left standing in the room. "You don't have to perform for me," he told her that first night, watching her hands work with a calm precision that had nothing performed about it at all. "I've watched 100 people in this hospital pretend to be fine. You're the first one who's actually just doing the work." It was such a small thing to say. She thought about it for a week anyway. For 8 months, what they built together felt like the one true thing neither of their worlds had touched yet. Quiet dinners after her night shifts, eaten standing up in her tiny kitchen because neither of them could wait for a table. A private, candlelit ceremony neither family knew about, in a garden behind a restaurant that closed just for them, with Grace as the only witness. A jade ring, older than his grandmother's grandmother, slid onto her finger with a promise that sounded like it belonged to a different life than the one his family had already written for him. Then came the Kang family spring gala. 600 guests. Chandeliers throwing gold light across white marble. And Daniel stood at that podium in front of everyone who mattered to his family's empire, and announced his engagement to Una Bach, daughter of an allied syndicate house, while Whitney stood 3 months pregnant in the back of that ballroom, invisible in the one room where she should have mattered most. He never once looked her way. Not when she walked out. Not when the doors closed behind her. She kept the ring anyway, because some promises are harder to take off than others. She never told him about the baby growing inside her. If he could choose his family's name over her love in front of 600 strangers, she decided on the cab ride home. He did not get to know what she was carrying with her when she left. But somewhere behind Daniel Kang's silence sat a version of the truth Whitney never got the chance to hear. And it would take almost losing everything for either of them to finally reach it. Present day. Eli was 14 months old, and Whitney had built a life steady enough that she had almost convinced herself she'd outrun the Kang name for good. Head pediatric nurse at Empire City General by 34. A modest walk-up apartment in Riverside with a crooked radiator and a good lock on the door. A son with his father's serious dark eyes and her own stubborn chin, who fell asleep best against her collarbone, right where the world felt small enough to manage. Almost. For 3 weeks, small things had stopped feeling small. A black car idling too long outside her building, engine running, no one getting out. A courier at the daycare front desk who asked one question too many about the little boy on the second floor. Her apartment door locked when she left that morning, unlocked when she came home that evening. Nothing missing, nothing broken, except her certainty that nothing was watching them anymore. She told herself it was new mother nerves talking. She told herself that right up until the afternoon a man in a plain gray suit stood across the street from Eli's daycare for 11 straight minutes. Not moving, not checking his phone, just watching the front door the way a person watches something they are deciding whether to walk toward. By the time Whitney crossed the street herself, he was gone, and she stood there in her scrubs feeling foolish and terrified in exactly equal measure. Then came the night Eli spiked a fever that made no medical sense. 104, gone completely by morning, filed away in his chart as unexplained, because nobody thought to ask exactly who had been alone with him at daycare that particular afternoon. Whitney sat up with him until sunrise, his small chest rising and falling against hers, and made herself a promise she did not yet know she would have to keep twice. Daniel Kang heard about the break-in before Whitney had even finished giving her statement to the responding officer. 2 years of complete silence, and he was standing in her doorway within 11 minutes of the call, still dressed like a man who had walked straight out of a war room mid-sentence, because he had. "You don't get to do this," Whitney said, arms crossed over the only kind of armor she had left. "You don't get to disappear for 2 years and show up now because a door was unlocked." "I never disappeared," Daniel said quietly. "I made sure you were both safe from a distance you were never supposed to notice." "Both?" Whitney repeated, and watched something behind his composed, careful face quietly fracture. "You knew." "I have known since the week you left," he said. "I have known every single day since, Whitney. I just didn't know how to walk back through a door I closed myself. So you watched from a distance instead." Her voice cracked on the word distance, and she hated that it did. "Do you have any idea what these 2 years have actually looked like for us?" "No," Daniel admitted, and it cost him something to say it plainly. "I don't. And that's the part one can't forgive myself for yet, either." She didn't ask him to stay that night. But she didn't ask him to leave either. And for a man who had spent 2 years reading her silences from far away, that alone told Daniel everything he needed to know about how much damage he still had left to repair. If someone you loved disappeared to keep you safe, without ever once asking what you actually wanted, is that real protection? Or is it just a gentler kind of abandonment? Tell me what you honestly believe in the comments, because Whitney is about to find proof that changes that answer completely. It was Grace Whitfield, Whitney's charge nurse, her fiercest friend, the closest thing to a mother this city had ever given her, who found the file that changed everything 2 nights later. The unexplained fever from 3 weeks earlier was not unexplained at all. Buried in an old case archive, it matched, almost line for line, a rare compound flagged only once before, in a sealed file from 6 years back, closed out under Daniel Kang's own signature. Someone inside Daniel's own world had already tried once. And whoever it was, they were getting closer, not further away. Whitney did not wait for Daniel to call her back. She walked straight into Kang Tower, past 3 separate security checkpoints, and set the lab report down on his desk herself, in front of the one man in that building she had never once trusted. Richard Song. 30 years of quiet loyalty stitched into the corner of every decision Daniel Kang had ever made, standing at his shoulder the way he always did. "Someone tried to kill our son," Whitney said, her voice not shaking, "not anymore. And I am finished being protected by a man who won't stand next to me in daylight." For the first time since the gala, Daniel looked at Richard instead of past him. And Richard, just for one unguarded half-second, forgot to look surprised. That night, in a quiet corner booth of a diner 3 blocks from her apartment, Daniel finally told her the truth he had swallowed whole for 2 straight years. Days before the gala, Richard had come to him with proof, forged, though Daniel did not know that yet, that a rival syndicate house had marked Whitney for death the moment they learned a Kang heir existed outside the sanctioned, approved marriage. Marrying Yuna, Richard had argued late into that night, was the only move fast enough to make the threat disappear before it ever reached her. Loving her only from a careful distance was the sole kind of protection Daniel believed he still had left to give. "I thought I was keeping you both alive," Daniel said, his hands wrapped so tightly around a coffee cup they had gone white at the knuckles. "I never once stopped to ask if you wanted to be kept safe by watching me disappear, instead of having me stand beside you." "The ring," Whitney said quietly, turning it once around her finger the way she did without noticing when she was thinking hardest. "Was any of it real, Daniel? Or was that just one more thing you did to keep me quiet and grateful?" "It was the only completely real thing I did that whole year," Daniel said, and for once his careful, controlled voice actually broke. Everything else was strategy. That ring was the one choice I made that had nothing to do with protecting the family name. Whitney did not forgive him. Not that night and not right away. But for the first time in 2 years, she understood the actual shape of the man who had broken her heart in front of 600 strangers, and it was smaller and sadder, and far more human than the villain she had spent 2 years quietly building in her mind. Richard Song felt the ground shift underneath him, and men like Richard do not sit still once they sense they are about to be caught. 2 days later, a woman in hospital scrubs nobody at Empire City General recognized walked straight into the pediatric wing carrying a visitor's badge that nobody on staff had actually approved. That was the fever alarm that opened this story. That was the monitor screaming before Whitney's hands could even catch up with her mind. Richard just froze for half a second when Daniel finally looked at him instead of past him. Comment your prediction right now. Is Richard the real danger here? Or is someone even closer to Whitney about to be exposed? You are seconds away from finding out the truth. Daniel reached the hospital exactly as hospital security pulled the fake nurse out of the stairwell. A loaded syringe still zipped inside her bag. And it was Una Bach, Daniel's own bride-to-be, silent for 2 entire years, trapped inside an arrangement she had never once actually wanted either, who finally broke that silence in the hallway outside the NICU. Richard chose me for you, Una said, shaking, her carefully composed voice finally cracking wide open. Because my father owes Richard a debt he has been quietly collecting for 10 years. Whitney's son was never the threat to this family, Daniel. He is the threat to what Richard has been building underneath this family for 30 years. A Kang heir born outside of Richard's control was never going to be allowed to live long enough to inherit anything at all. And the jade ring, the one Whitney had never once stopped wearing, through every long month of silence, was not, it turned out, only a private promise between 2 people in a garden. Under Kang family law, older than the syndicate itself, it was a binding first wife ceremony. Whitney had been Daniel's true and legitimate wife since the night he first placed it on her finger. Eli was never some outside complication to be managed and hidden. Down the hall, a doctor stepped out just long enough to tell them Eli was stable, resting, and in her exact words, furious about the 4 and otherwise perfectly fine. And Whitney let herself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. He had always been the rightful heir, which made him the only person left standing between Richard Song and 30 patient years of buried ambition. I should have told someone years ago, Una said, quieter now, looking at Whitney instead of Daniel. I told myself staying quiet was keeping the peace. I didn't understand until tonight that keeping the peace and keeping a child safe were never actually the same thing. Richard did not run when the truth finally caught up with him. Men who believe the world owes them something rarely do. He simply stood very still in that hospital hallway, surrounded by the very family council he had quietly managed for 3 decades, and watched 30 years of patience collapse in under a single minute. Una's testimony, a sealed file carrying Daniel's own 6-year-old signature, and one syndicate elder who remembered exactly what a jade ring like that one meant the moment he saw it on Whitney's hand. By morning, Richard Song had no family left inside which to hide. The council removed him quietly and completely, the exact way families like the Kangs have always dealt with the people who forget their place. No headlines, no chaos, just 30 years of influence gone by sunrise, and a chair at that table that would sit empty from now on. Una was not punished for a scheme she had never asked to be part of. 2 months later, she left the syndicate world entirely and opened a small flower shop near the harbor, and Whitney was, unexpectedly, one of her very first customers. Eli recovered fully within the week, stronger, the doctors said, than a boy his age had any right to be, though Whitney privately gave the credit to stubbornness he had clearly inherited in equal parts from both of his parents. Daniel did not ask Whitney for forgiveness at that hospital bedside. He asked for a real chance instead, the kind measured out in ordinary Tuesdays and school pickups and simply staying, not in one more grand dramatic gesture at one more gala. He moved out of Kang Tower entirely, into a small apartment 4 blocks from hers, close enough to show up every single day, and far enough away to prove he finally understood that real trust gets rebuilt in 1,000 ordinary moments, never demanded all at once in one dramatic one. He learned Eli's whole bedtime routine within the first month, and never once acted like memorizing it was beneath him. He showed up to 2 ordinary Tuesday pediatric shifts just to sit in the family waiting room, doing paperwork, close enough that Whitney could see him through the window if she needed to. Slowly, in 100 unremarkable moments, neither of them tried to make dramatic. Trust started rebuilding itself from the ground up. The only way it ever actually can. 6 months later, at a far smaller gathering than the one that had once broken her heart in front of 600 strangers, Daniel Kang stood in front of the people who actually mattered and introduced Whitney exactly the way he always should have the very first time. Not as a secret kept in the dark. As his wife in the daylight for everyone to finally see. Whitney still wears the jade ring today. These days, it does not mean a promise made quietly in hiding anymore. It means one kept out loud in daylight in front of anyone who happens to be watching. If you were Whitney, would you have let Daniel back into your life? Or made him earn every single day of it first? Hit subscribe and tap like if you're new here to Empire City Romance Stories, and tell me your honest answer in the comments below.